Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We've got a great show for you lined up today. We're going to give you an update on the offensive coordinator search. We've got a new name to add to the hat, if you will. Kind of a surprise pick. Nobody's kind of thought this out or predicted it, but it is interesting. I'm curious to hear what you think it means, Keith. And then we're going to go into the full off-season mode and start with our salary cap show for the 2025 off-season. This kind of sets up everything in the off-season. So once we have identified what our salary cap looks like and what we can do to manipulate it, we can start going into roster building and construction of the roster and what that looks like starting in free agency, and create some priority lists as far as position groups and positions and so forth. So welcome in, Keith. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, we definitely have a trend now. We got 4 names and they all have some pretty common things in common. And we definitely get an idea of what McDonald and Schneider are looking for in their next offensive coordinator. And it isn't quite what you and I were expecting when this process started. Might be more interesting than what you and I were expecting, but
I think so.
Yeah, a little different.
Well, the interesting thing for me, Keith, and you probably feel this way too, is, you go into this offseason, 2025, you've come out of a year where you've had a big transition from head coach Pete Carroll and company. You go into a new scheme, new coordinators, new head coach, new philosophy, new culture, all of it, and come out looking pretty decent. You predicted the record for the team at the outset. That's where they ended up being, but the offensive coordinator stuff was just really bad, and now they need to make that change. We thought, at least I did, that John Schneider and Mike McDonald might want to go for the sure thing, because to preserve employment, essentially. If John Schneider selects a offensive coordinator and that offensive coordinator doesn't work in 2025, is his leash so short that that ownership would let him go. And I think it is kind of that short to me. And so I think I was thinking, okay, he would go for a sure deal. He would go for the sure deal, make sure the offense ran at least very competently, and allowed that defense to really kind of take the lead and improve in that manner, get to, 11, 12 wins, get into the playoffs, go from there. This search is a bunch of young guys with not a lot of experience, but a lot of upside. And it seems like we did that once or twice. And it just hasn't worked. It's a big risk to me. And something that I would think Schneider would want to avoid, but here they are trying to get another pick where they're trying to hit a home run, like knock it out of the park or strike out. Like, what's your thought process on this?
Well, I mean, they knocked a coaching hire out of the park going super young with Mike McDonald. And it appears they want to do that on the offense too, is go find a young, innovative, creative mind that's going to not just bring in a system that other people know how to defend, but genuinely come up with something that's going to be unique and be, okay, some of these guys they're coming from the Vikings, and so you're talking about bringing in that offense, which is, part of the Sean McVay tree and some of those things. But by going super young, they're looking for innovative ideas that maybe haven't been implemented in those other systems yet, to go along with the knowledge of those systems. And so, so let's just talk about the guy that we've added to the name, because Udinski, the assistant quarterback coach, assistant offensive coordinator, doesn't even hold a actual title in Minnesota, and he's 28 years old, which means he will be 6 years younger than his quarterback if the Seahawks hire him.
Well, he does have a couple titles, but they're so obscure. It's like, do they even exist?
Yeah,
Assistant offensive coordinator and assistant quarterback coach.
Yeah, he's not the quarterback coach. He's not the offensive coordinator, but he is the assistant to both of those guys.
Yeah.
And he, like I said, he's 28. Thought to be just absolutely brilliant, just super smart and all of that. Honestly, this kind of scares me because if he's only been an assistant, he's never actually done either job. It's like, okay. And also, we were sold a bill of goods on a young guy who was absolutely brilliant, but didn't really have a lot of experience. A couple of years ago, when the Seahawks brought Sean Desai in to coordinate the defensive passing game and do some game planning and help be an assistant defensive coordinator, and that turned out to be an absolute disaster. So,
yeah,
like I
another
said,
brilliant mind coach with well intentions that just didn't turn out. The only thing that gives me pause on this is his age and inexperience, but everything else points to the idea that it really is trying to marry up with the same sort of person, the same sort of thought processes, the same sort of values, if you will, that Mike Macdonald has on the defensive side and as a head coach to bring onto the offensive side. It's very intriguing to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, to bring in a 28-year-old to legitimately interview for a offensive coordinator position in the NFL is unprecedented, really. You just don't see that. Guys are, usually experienced, or if they are inexperienced, they've got a number of years in the league as assistants and so forth. You're talking 35, 40 years old, usually.
The only other one that I can think of that did that, became an offensive coordinator in his 20s is Sean McVay.
Yeah.
Who then became a head coach at 31.
Yeah.
Which is crazy young, but he's been one of the best coaches in the NFL since day one when he got hired. So there is that. And I think there is always going to be that, the NFL teams have been trying to find the next Sean McVay since the original Sean McVay. And I've seen other teams, try and outthink the room and fail in doing that, including Seattle with Shane Waldron.
You can either be safe, Keith, like I thought that they would be, or you're going to be innovative and you're going to try to think outside the box. And it seems like so far that's what they're doing. I mean, they've got another candidate that they've been looking at is the offensive line coach for the Lions, Hank Fraley. Guy has been an offensive lineman in the league for a while. Thought of as being a very tough guy, a leader in the locker room kind of a guy, but kind of a bad body, good player mold, if you would. Hank Fraley is the epitome of what you would want to establish the run game, for example, but has no pass game experience, no coordinator experience, no play calling, etc. So, and then you've got Thomas Brown,
he's also the run game coordinator. So he does have that aspect, but you're right. As far as like, developing route concepts and
all of
those things, like that's not what his, playing experience or coaching experience are. And it's a huge part of doing the job. So I think you'd end up with a really good running game, but would he adapt and produce you a good passing game?
My thought process was, okay, you take the Hank Fraley and you pair him with the Grant Udinsky, and you'd end up with this like crazy combination of what you would need to do things successfully, except for call plays. And that's going to be an unknown. And that may be an unknown going into this process that we end up with. And they said, quite frankly, McDonald came out and said, that's not necessarily a what am I trying to say?
Prerequisite.
prerequisite for the job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it wouldn't surprise me if that is the case. And the other guy they're looking at is um, Clint Kubiak, former New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator, and been around the league and in pass game coordinators and quarterback coach kind of positions for the last 6 or 7 years. Um, and to me, that's the safest pick of these. And he's still a young guy. He's
Yes,
still
he
been
is.
at the NFL level for 11 seasons. He's still in his mid 30s. He's a guy
Mm-hmm.
that's up and coming. I think that would be, to me, the safest way that Seattle can go while still being somewhat innovative and
And he's
getting a
done the
young
job.
guy. And he's done the job.
Yeah. So when you're looking at Hank Fraley, as you know, with the running game and all of that, you got to remember that the Seahawks still have on staff Peavy, who was the passing game coordinator this last year, and a guy that
Mm-hmm.
uh, that McDonald mentioned as being, someone that he trusted and someone he could go ask questions about the offense to, and it felt very much like he was a Mike McDonald guy, and he was the pass game coordinator, and the passing game was the only thing that worked last year. So maybe you pair those two guys together. So you have Frank Haley to or Fraley to fix the running game. You've already got PV, and you keep the passing game kind of as is, and then you give someone play calling duties who knows what play action is, and you roll that way. So there's different ways for this to go. I don't hate the that they're talking to guys like Udinsky. I'm scared of that. When Clint Kubiak's sitting there and he's
Mm-hmm.
37, so he's a year younger than McDonald, but he's done the job. He's done it well, and he's coached at every level of the offense from quality control all the way up through offensive coordinator. So he knows the NFL. He's done all that at the NFL level. This isn't a Ryan Grubb who'd never done anything in the NFL before joining Seattle. So, um, yeah, it just makes a lot of sense for him to be given an
Now,
opportunity. And guys like that don't become available very often.
could you could you get a Clint Kubiak and also hire Grant Udinsky to be your pass game coordinator, quarterbacks coach?
I don't think so, because in order to get Udinsky over here, I guess if you gave him the quarterbacks coach title, since he's an assistant quarterbacks coach with the Vikings, you might be able to use that because you can block lateral moves. And for him to being the pass game coordinator versus assistant offensive coordinator, that could be a lateral move, right? And so, but if you give him the quarterbacks coach job instead of being an assistant, maybe because you know what I mean, there has to be a promotion. You can't just go
Mm-hmm.
hire this guy who's under contract and be like, I know you want him, but too bad, we're going to take him, unless you're giving him a promotion. And so that would have to work out. And that's, yeah, I mean, that's really where it's just a weird rule, and how all of that, because you have guys that are interviewing for jobs, but then teams that don't want to lose guys. But do you want to employ someone who doesn't want to be there with
I
you?
would,
Like, I
I
don't know. It's
would,
the whole system's weird.
I would, honestly take the Seahawks at their word that they are interviewing him for the offensive coordinator job, and they
Yes.
wouldn't offer him something less. There's a thing in the NFL where you don't want to waste somebody's time, and they're not going to
Mm-hmm.
waste your time. And so I do believe that this interview, if requested and if granted, and if he does interview, which it all sounds like it's going to happen, um, that it's legit and that they're looking for him. Now, if he goes into that interview and blows Mike McDonald away, which I have a feeling that he will, because Mike McDonald is a similar person that looking for a similar profile in a person that he trusts and to guide the offense. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up getting it. I just don't understand. I would be as concerned as you are, more or less, until it gets, I figure out who he is, how he fits, what the plan is. Um, but I would sure be excited Like if I was a Seahawk fan, getting an up and coming guy that blew somebody away enough at 28 years old to get the job, would tell me pretty much everything I need to know. Like, okay, here we
I don't
go.
know. When you get guys that are significantly younger than the players that they're in charge of, um, players already make a lot more than the coaches, and then now you've got players that are older and more experienced than the coaches. You run into problems. There's not a lot of guys that handle that and do that well. And so again, it's just, you can go in and blow Mike McDonald away, but can you go into a room and keep, DK Metcalf's attention and command
Well,
authority over guys like that?
according to everyone associated with Grant Udinski, he's been able to do that. And in fact, he has led like a guy like Sam Darnold, who's been a career mediocre quarterback, into very much a career year, and certainly Pro Bowl worthy there in Minnesota. And from all intents and purposes, he's the guy that's really spent the most time with him, along with all the other quarterbacks in that room, and just done a great job. So I'm just curious. I'm just so curious as to why they interviewed, what, if they were just digging for information, or what was going on there. Maybe they're trying to get to Josh McCown, at some point. Maybe he'll be the next announced interview.
Because there are two names there are two other names that haven't been announced. No reporter's been able to dig that information out and publish it, but supposedly there are two names that we don't know yet that are out there. So how shocked would you be if the name that ends up being the guy is Mike McCarthy?
I'd be very shocked.
Yeah.
I would be very shocked, and I think that he's probably up for a head coach position somewhere. I'm sure that he'll be a head coach in this league this year. I
don't know about that. Just, he was kind of chased out of Green Bay, and then he hasn't been particularly good in Dallas. And but I keep reading, and it's never anyone associated with the team, or even someone who reports on the team, but more like national things, like Bleacher Report and whatever, that are like, ooh, Mike McCarthy would be an interesting one in Seattle. And I'm like, dear God, no. We don't need an old guy who's, the NFL's kind of gone past him and his offensive style and everything. Like, we don't bring in that. Like, that would be a mess. But
he reached playoffs the majority of his time there in Dallas. I don't think he, you said mediocre, and I disagree a little bit. Sure, they haven't gone to deep in the playoffs or anything like that, but they've built they've built decent rosters.
Didn't they win 4
they've gotten into the playoffs. Injuries have taken a toll on that team for years and years now at this point. Dak Prescott, obviously. And so I don't know. I mean, do I hate him for any reason? No. But would I want him? No, because I think
not even a little bit.
It seems like Seattle, it'd be like the Dan Quinn thing from last year, right? It'd be an older coach that's established, that, doesn't really necessarily fit the Mike McDonald mold or future. And it would just be kind of one of those Band-Aid sort of things. A guy that's that's looking to repair his resume so he can move on in a year or two to another head coaching job. And I don't necessarily think that we would be looking for that.
So do you look at the job that Dan Quinn did this year?
Oh, I know. It's amazing.
And still think that he would have just been, a Band-Aid and not a good hire?
Well, no, I didn't say that.
That defense went from 30th to 3rd in one season. So
yeah, I like the way that it went for Seattle. Obviously, with our hire, we didn't get as far into the playoffs as I would have hoped. I think we were 2 games away, Keith, 2 winnable games from being a 12-win team and having an opportunity to be in the playoffs, and who knows then what happens. So Mike McDonald wasn't too far away from the success that Dan Quinn had overall with a completely different roster, different circumstances, all that kind of stuff. But I would prefer to have Mike McDonald's future as opposed to Dan Quinn's future.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. So
let's get into this salary cap stuff, because this is this is kind of the big part of the off season where everything else kind of feeds off of this. And I'm going to let you dive in a little bit on the numbers to kind of set this thing up, and then we can talk about how we proceed.
Yeah. So the Seahawks they're in a really odd for them place right now, a really kind of John Schneider has never managed the cap in a way where they go into a league year having to cut a bunch of people just to get under the cap so they can do stuff. But that's where they're standing right now, is that they are going into this next year with $27.5 million too much on the books next year, before the year even starts and before they even start re-signing players, signing free agents, drafting players. They're not in a great spot. Now, less than a week ago, looking at this, the spot where they were thought to be at was about $8.5 million over, and I'm like, okay, that's more doable. And then we know that $6 million is going to Geno Smith because he had a bunch of incentives, and there's some other ones in there. That's going to be some of it. But where did the rest of it come from? And I had to go back and do some digging. And so originally the expected cap for 2025 was about $280 million. And it's recently been cut back to $272.5 million. So they've lost about $7.5 million of expected cap space because the cap's just not going to grow as much as was originally anticipated. And so between that 7.5, Geno's 6, that's 13, right? And you go from 8.5 to 27. That's 20. That's a big chunk of where this change came from. But they're still $27.5 million over the cap. And that's with none of the players that are set to be free agents on the books, and with all the dead money from guys like Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs coming off the books.
And they had $8.42 million in cap space from 2024 roll into
that was already accounted
as well.
That was already accounted in there. Because anything that's not spent in 1 year automatically rolls over to the next. So the over the cap and those kind of services that track this stuff already had accounted for that. So that rollover was already part of it.
So I can solve this entire number in one move. Should I do it or should I not do it? Geno Smith has a $44.5 million cap hit if he stays,
which is
and
massive.
We save $31 million in cap savings if he's released. Should I release Geno Smith and solve our cap hell all in one move, Keith?
Honestly, I don't think you have to, but he cannot play on a $44.5 million.
You and I both agree on that.
There's no way. If the only way to keep him is to keep that cap number, you're forced to cut him.
Okay. So now that we know the kind of the number, we need to make up for $27 million to net out zero cap room for the year. And you have to do that by the league year beginning, which I think is March 12th this year.
It's early March. Yeah. And
you had mentioned before we push
way to do this.
You had mentioned before we push record too that this is the top 51 contracts. There are other contracts associated with that cap number. So they really have a little bit of leeway there that they could kind of push things around a little bit. But let's start with the 27 million in the red. We need to get into the black, and we also need to be able to build a roster in 2025. Usually in past years, you've seen Seattle come up with between 45 and 65 million dollars in cap space before they enter free agency, so they can work in the offseason. How
Mm-hmm.
do we get to in that realm? How do we get to 45 to 65, 70 million dollars where John Schneider usually likes to operate in the offseason in order for Seattle to solve its roster issues in 2025?
Well, without doing anything to Geno Smith's contract, you almost can't. But there are a number of moves that can be done to get you in that direction.
Well, let's talk about Geno Smith just for a second. Let's say, he's the best option that Seattle has in the offseason. The draft doesn't look great. Free agency is okay. Sam Darnold's out there. He may be retained with Minnesota. He's not very much of an upgrade over Geno Smith, but he is 27 years old.
He's
There's a
27
couple
years
other
old and will
things.
not cost $44.5 million.
There's a couple other things out there, et cetera, but it's not looking tremendous. Okay, beyond that, and so let's figure out Geno Smith's contract in a way that we can extend him and make that first year or even the first 2 years cap number drastically go down so it saves Seattle some money. How do we do that?
Okay, so the way that you do that is that you extend him. And you make his contract a little longer because he's going into the final year of his contract. And the way that the contract is, 13.5 million of that is dead money. Everything else of that 44.5 is stuff that would come off the books if you cut him. And so if you're looking at this, because he's got zero guaranteed money. If you're looking at this from Geno's point of view, he'll be 35. He's coming off a down year, or he was second in the league in interceptions. And he knows he's not going to get 44.5 million on the open market if he's cut. So if they can be like, all right, so you aren't going to get that 31 million that you're due next year from anyone else. What if we made it 25, but we also added 2 more years onto this, and so that signing bonus money, which would be pretty much all of they would transfer everything from, so that whole 25 would be there over the 3 years, and you end up pushing 16 million of that 25 forward. So you'd have the 16 million that I'm talking about, plus the 13.5 dead money that he already is there, that would be on the old contract. And you'd end up with, essentially, because 13.5 and 16. So we'll call it 30. His cap number would drop from 44.5 to 30 million. And you'd have now him under contract for 3 years. And you'd have made $15 million of cap room up. A move like that could very easily free up a bunch of cap room, keep him under contract, and get you in a position where you can continue to look for a replacement. Because by the end of that contract, he's going to be 38, and by then,
you best have got another option on your roster. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we can save $15 million in 2025 by restructuring Geno Smith's contract. We're not yet in the black, Keith. Nope. Who's next?
The next one would be Tyler Lockett. And as much as I absolutely love Tyler Lockett, his cap number next year of 31.89 million. So let's call it 31. Is never going to happen for a third wide receiver that is seriously declining. He will cost about 14 million in dead money if you cut him, but you can save 17. You can replace his production that we got this last season for about 4. So that 17 million in savings is much greater than the production that it's not worth keeping that. And so that contract, just to simply cut him outright, would save you $17 million, and I absolutely foresee Seattle doing that.
I do too. Okay, so after that move, we are now $5 million under the cap.
Yep.
Okay, what's next?
So that's like that gets you under the cap. If you restructure Geno, cut Tyler Lockett, you're under the cap. The next move that is likely to happen is, well, in terms of impact, because there's some other moves that are entirely likely to happen, but they'll have smaller impact. But would be Dre Jones, the guy who's been a kind of a massive disappointment his entire time here. Cutting him outright would save you $11.5 million. Cutting him outright with a June 1st designation. Well, I guess it would be the same. So, wait, no, I hit that the wrong button. With the June 1st designation, which basically spreads the dead bounty out a little bit, would give you $16.5 million. I could see them doing that in order to get an extra little bit, and decrease the number of these kind of cuts that you have to make in order to make it happen. But
so
for now,
post June 1st designation, we're up to $21 million under the cap.
Yep.
After
and if
that
they
move.
don't,
now,
if they don't, then they're at 16, because it's about a $5 million difference.
If are we going to do anything with DK Metcalf? Is there an extension? Is he going to be cut? Is he going to be traded?
Oh, he will 100%. He will not be cut. 100% he will not be cut.
Can we extend and or restructure DK Metcalf? It's got a $31.85 million cap hit.
Even trading DK Metcalf doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're going to save 10. You're going to have $21 million of dead money, so you're only going to save $10.85 million against the cap, and you cannot replace him for that. So unless they're going to give you multiple like high picks, like a first and a second rounder, and you're hoping that one of those you can turn into a star number one caliber wide receiver, it makes no sense to trade him.
I saw a trade proposal today where it was a third and a fourth round pick, which people will laugh at, but that's kind of where the value is. Yeah,
I don't agree with
that. What could we save if we extended DK Metcalf, added 2 years to the deal?
Okay, so his base salary for next year is $18 million, and so really that's what we're playing with. If you add 2 years to his deal, and you convert that $18 million into $17 million of bonus, so he would just get it up front instead of as game checks. You could take that $17 million and push it out into the next 2 years, or you split it up over 3 years, and so that ends up being, we'll call it 5.5 for this year, and the rest of it would go. So you'd cut it back from 18 to 5.5. You can save about $13 million if you extend DK for 2 years and you convert his base salary down into a signing bonus. And then you'd have to guarantee money in those other 2 years in order to make that happen and not give him another big check. Or maybe you assign it so he gets a big check after this year. But yeah, you could save about 13 or about 12. We'll round. We'll call it $12 million with a restructure on DK. And I actually expect that to happen.
Almost likely. I do too.
That's an insanely likely thing to happen, because his other years that are left of his quote unquote current deal are void years, meaning that he won't play on them. He can void the contract and not be there, and enter free agency and make a boatload of money. So I highly expect the Seahawks to get that deal done and get it done, very early in this process.
Another cut candidate that nobody wants to see cut, but also he hasn't met his contract, lived up to his contract, is Uchenna Nwasu.
That's so hard.
$21.5 million due in 2025.
Yep.
Would we cut him outright? Is it a restructure candidate? What's going on with that contract this year?
Okay. That's a hard one because new coaching staff doesn't have the loyalty to him because he had a monster year a couple of years ago, and earned that contract. And if he was still playing at that level, would be worth that number. He was that good, but he's missed most of the last 2 seasons with injury. He's due $14.5 million. That money, plus he's also due,
he's got a $21.1 million cap hit.
Yeah. So that 14.5, that's 2/3 of his cap hit. You would lose by cutting him. There's some other things mixing in there. You end up, if you just cut him out right away, you'd end up saving a little over $8 million in cap room for cutting him. You could extend him, but do you want to?
You can save $14 million if you go post June 1st on him.
Yep. If you already have Boye Mafe, who's younger and is playing at a really high level. You have Hall, who is significantly younger and playing at a really high level. Nuasu hasn't been there for 2 years. You don't know if he will return back to the form that he had after, before missing most of 2 seasons. Do you want to set yourself up with a restructure where you're extending him in that kind of situation because of where he's at now?
It really depends on if all those injuries are unrelated. Are they related? Is it knees?
The other part of this, though, he's also under contract for 2026, which is why it's $8.5 million in savings and not the 14, because you've got additional bonus stuff that would count originally for 2016 getting pulled back into 2025. And so any extension that you would do would actually be beyond 2025 or 2026. So you'd be like 2027, 2028. So now you're looking 3 years down.
It's true.
You add 2 years.
You've already got a bunch of sunk costs. So
yeah, you've got 4 years left of a guy that hasn't been able to stay healthy. And you've already got his replacements actively playing. And it's one of those things where I could very much see the team just being like, we're going to move on. And if he doesn't if he's like, okay, no, he wants to stay. Maybe they void out the 2026 year so that he can become a free agent and he gets a prove it contract, where he basically gets 1 year at less money, and he's got to prove that he can stay healthy and everything, so that a year from now he's entering free agency ready to go get a contract again. And that's the type of thing that's going to depend on him and his agent. And what do they want to do? I wouldn't be surprised if they do that, given where he's been in terms of not being able to play and not even being a starter when he came back. But yeah, so if they can get him to free agency at 29 instead of at 30, that's a big deal. And if he is healthy this next year and plays like he did in 2023, he would be set to make a lot of money a year from now. And so that's the type of thing that could work out for both sides, where he takes a pay cut, gives the team a bunch of cap room, but gets to free agent sooner and just bets on himself.
So are you talking like saving half of his cap number in 2025?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to write down 10 million. Okay. Now the other one that has no chance of being cut, probably not restructured, we just signed him to a deal last year, is Leonard Williams. And he's got a lot of money sitting there with an opportunity maybe to shift some things around to bonus dollars and so forth. Do you expect that to happen, since we need the money? Yeah.
I mean, that's one of those things that teams do when they need it. They won't do that one right away because they simply don't need to. He's actually got he's under contract for 2 more seasons, 2025 and 2026. They did not sign him to a long-term deal, given his age, but they could easily take that $20 million of base salary that they owe him next year, convert it into signing bonus, which basically pushes 10 million into the year after. So they would save 10 million this year, and they would add 10 million to his cap number for 2026. So he would drop to $19 million for this coming year, but go up to $34 million for the year after.
So, okay. How about Noah Fant?
Okay. Noah Fant is, well, it kind of depends on how you value him. Cut him outright, 8.9 million. Boom. Done. You've got AJ, Barner showed up and played really well, but you don't have anything other than the two of them on the roster because Pharaoh Brown is not a guy that you bring back in any way. So I don't know what you do with him. He might be a trade candidate because he actually has some value, and that contract isn't terrible for his position and skill set, but the team may value what he brings and want to keep him, or they may be like, nah, we can do without and let him go. So there's a lot of variability in what you do there.
Okay, so let's just stop there. I mean, Roy Robertson.
Bring up two more names. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
That was one. Roy Robertson, $6 million. He's a rotational defensive lineman that doesn't. He gets about 15 to 20 snaps a game. There's no way he's making $6.6 million next year. And he'll have zero dead cap if they cut him. So you can get all of that back. And the other one is George Fant, who barely played this year because he got hurt. And his cap number is $5.6 million for a backup tackle. And now that Abe Lucas's knee is healthy, they can save 3.8 for cutting him. So I really expect them to do both of those, and that saves them 11.4 overall. And that just makes a lot of sense to me for both those guys to be gone.
Yeah. So we've just generated about $70 million in cap savings by restructuring Geno, cutting Tyler Lockett, cutting Dre Jones, DK extension, cutting Nuaso, restructuring Leo Williams, cutting Noah Fant and Roy Robertson and George Fant.
So that's 70 million. But does that account for the 28?
Yes.
Million. So we've used up we've gotten under the cap and generated 70 million.
Yeah. Let me add this up. 15 for Geno. Cut Tyler, 17. Dre Jones cut. I'm not using June 1st. 12 million extension for DK. Cut Nuaso. Restructure Leo. Cut Noah Fant.
I was trying to keep track of this as we were going, but I stopped at some point because I was looking at too many numbers, and yeah.
66.8. That includes getting back to net zero before the savings. So 66.8 potential savings on those moves that we've just made without involving anybody else on the roster. And those are seemingly likely to happen. I mean, these aren't everything that could happen. These aren't possibly going to happen, but likely to happen. And that gives John Schneider $66.8 million to work with in free agency.
Well, a move that we didn't
potentially. I mean, minus some money
would be Rashawn Jenkins, who lost his starting job.
Yeah,
and cutting him would generate 5.2 million.
Yeah, there you go. So we'll need some money in the reserves for camp stuff and injured reserve and the draft
practice squad and
But let's just say, after that, we could probably be at least $55 million.
Yeah.
After that Jenkins deal. So that'd take us up to 70, need 15 in reserve or 10, at the least. So, yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's easy to look at that. If everyone goes on to over the cap, you can, look up the Seahawks, you see that 27 million negative number out there, and you just think doom and gloom. This is going to be the worst offseason possible. It's the third worst salary cap situation in the NFL, but salary cap can be manipulated, and it always can. And maybe John, obviously John has had, he has an ongoing 3-year plan, salary plan anyway. I'm sure they saw this, ahead of time, that this was what was going to happen, and the moves to counter that.
Well, so if you look at what they've done over the last couple of years, is they this year they had a ton of dead money because they cut a bunch of bad contracts like Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. Those come off the books. But in order to get under the cap and have a competitive team with all that dead money, they had to push a bunch of last year's cap space into next year, right? And from 2024 into 2025, which is why they're over now. And so basically 2024 was the first year of this cap reset. 2025 will be like the second year of the cap reset. And then 2026 and beyond will be back to normal. And so, yeah, there'll be some of that. But if you look at, they're 26 or what is it? 27 over now. But the contracts that we're talking about, this isn't a team that's going, oh, we can't afford to keep DK Metcalf anymore. We have to cut him to get under the cap. They're keeping their players. They're keeping their core, right? Tyler is a guy that nobody wants to see go, but he's on the decline. He isn't the productive. He isn't earning anywhere close to what his contract is anymore. Yeah. Because
these moves are not going to affect the quality of the roster. You've got Tyler Lockett that's going to be cut. Dre Jones is going to be cut. Didn't live up to the contract. DK extension. He's not going anywhere. Nuasu's going to be cut. He only played in 2 games this year. We're restructuring Williams. Noah Fant cut. Yeah, he caught 40 balls, but his impact was not that was minimal. Was not a $13 million,
Yeah. Robertson Harris cut. Fant cut.
Right. And replaceable guys, all replaceable. Fant only played in 2 games this year, no impact whatsoever. Roy Robertson was diminished the moment he got onto the roster. He stayed only because Seattle was in dire straits for guys.
They traded away essentially nothing for him, a 6th round pick, not even in the 2025 draft, but in 2026, to get a guy because they had so many injuries on the defensive line. They just needed to be able to field a team. And he, stuck around 10 or 15 snaps a game once everyone got healthy. But you're not paying $6.5 million for a low on the depth chart rotational defensive tackle. Right. Most of the time you can get those, undrafted free agents that can. I remember Brian Monet. That's who he was. He was a undrafted free agent that they signed kind of off the street because they needed a rotational defensive tackle. And so you can get guys like that. They're out there.
So the interesting thing for me after this exercise, Keith, is that 6 players make up over 62% of Seattle's salary cap. And we have to touch each one of those in order to manipulate the dollars to get right. Yep. Which you got to do every year, but 177 million out of 286 million is pointed towards those 6 players. It's kind of crazy how contracts work in the NFL and salary caps. And you just the point of this exercise was how easy it is to manipulate to do what you need to do to get
the names that you and I talked about were the top 7 salary cap numbers for next year. And 8 out of the top 9. Yeah. The only player in the top 9 that we aren't going to do anything with their contract is Devin Witherspoon.
That's true.
And then you go, beyond that, and you only have to skip over 2 names to get to Roy Robertson Harris, 1 more name to get to George Fant. Like.
The other player right under George Fant is a unique player to me in this whole offseason kind of look. It's like he's really cheap, but also what kind of return are you getting for your investment? And that's Tariq Woolen. You know, he's under basically now a 1-year contract for 5,300,000. You can save nearly all of that by releasing him or trading him.
You can always release a guy like Woolen, but you could trade him if you can find a trade partner for him and save that, 5.2 million, because he'll only have 83,000 in dead money.
Yes.
But yeah, if you could find that trade partner, save 5.2 million. You do that. The other option there, because of that same situation with very little dead money, he's making extend him, turn that 5.2 million into mostly bonus. I mean, you can make 4 of it into bonus, add 3 years to his contract, and drop his cap number down to basically 1.3. And yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you could do. And
it really depends on Mike McDonald and how he feels about him going forward. If he sees him as part of a key part of his defense going forward, you certainly would want to extend. I'm not so sure. I don't know. It's one of those question marks for me. And how do you feel about the roster and about the cap room and the ability to work in the off season, given the exercise we just went through?
Well, I think they're going to be okay. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about this is you're like, yeah, all of this money is tied up in 7 players, and we have to touch all 7 of those contracts. But Dre Jones, Tyler Lockett, Uchenna Nwasu, 3 of those 7 names that we talked about, even Noah Fant, if you want to throw him in there. These are not key contributors. It's so weird to say that about Tyler Lockett because he's been so good for so long, but he was not a key contributor last year.
He was pretty key. 3rd in receptions on the team. I mean, or 4th if you count Fant. He's a 3rd wide receiver. There's no doubt in the NFL, he's a 3rd wide receiver. He's got value. He just doesn't have $31 million of value.
He doesn't have $17 million worth of value, and that's how much money they've saved by cutting him. He's got $5 million worth of value.
I agree.
Because that's how much it would
veteran
cost to replace him.
Great veteran presence, upside. You're going to have, he's going to catch 40 balls for you. He's going to move the chains. He's going to score a couple touchdowns, but he's not the guy.
He's not the guy he was. Yeah. And so I just look, you can generate a ton of cap space by getting rid of guys that weren't key contributors. Like Uchenna Nwasu and Dre Jones. And so your roster doesn't necessarily, for Seattle, they're in a position right now, their roster doesn't get weaker significantly.
Dre Jones did get better throughout the season.
He did, because they limited his role and they gave.
But I do think he could be
a
replaced.
lot more of his stuff to Hall.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy where you can replace his production with a fairly decent draft pick, like 2nd round, 3rd round guy.
I think there may be a trade market for him, because if you're trading for him, you're trading for him at a cap number of 11.5. If you are the team that's acquiring him, he's only going to count 11.5 towards your salary cap. And given that he got better and he does, generate pressure and that kind of stuff, that might be worth it to you, because that's much more in line with his talent.
How do you come up with the 11.5 on Jones?
Because
he's got $16 million.
I guess you're right. No, yeah, I was taking out the per game bonuses when I shouldn't have. I forgot that he has stuff in that column of the thing. So yeah, it would be 16. It would be his. And so yeah, that's gonna be harder to find a trade partner for. Because are you going to trade for a guy that at 16 million? I don't know.
I think you end up cutting him. I think he's a cut guy. I think unfortunately Tyler Lockett. Thank you, Tyler. Nwasu's could be. a guy, depending on how they view him on the injury history stuff, could be a guy that they would want. But I
That's such a
don't know
huge
that
cap
they would
number,
want
though.
him at 21.1.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're a team with a rookie quarterback or a second year quarterback and you want to make a jump, and you have a pile of cap space, is Tyler Lockett worth $10 million?
Tyler Lockett could be worth 10 million to a team that has $100 million worth of cap space this year. Yeah.
Yeah. And they could, throw a 6th round pick at Seattle to get a guy like Lockett. I could see a team doing that. I also don't think it likely, but I could see a team doing it.
Yeah, he clearly dropped off this year. It's one of those things where it's,
mm-hmm.
So anyway, I feel good about the roster, the discussion we've just had. You add Rashawn Jenkins into that. Nothing against Jenkins, but just Kobe Bryant beat him out, and we've already got his replacement on the roster, and you go from there. You're not going to pay a backup safety in this league what you're paying Jenkins at 7.7. Just you're not.
No, not with the way Kobe Bryant played this year.
I think the biggest
mind. So
the biggest question for me are 2 contracts. Everything else is kind of easy to figure out, and they can do it or they don't do it. Is Geno Smith extension or cut? Now there are some, including I think it was Corbin Smith and Rob Staten, believe that they are going to outright cut Geno Smith. Who else was published something about Geno Smith that thought that they were going to just cut him? So anyway, there's that out there. The belief that he's just going to be cut. And also there's equal measure out there about extension. Well, you'd have to bring a guy like Darnold in.
See, Darnold's not going to make it to free agency. The Vikings are going to sign him.
Or you trade for McCarthy or somebody. But what I'm saying. Yeah.
If you trade for McCarthy from the Vikings, who should have had a rookie year but tore his ACL and didn't play at all this year. If you go trade for him, you could cut Geno because you've got your guy, and you're going to go all in at building around a super young quarterback.
And then that's where Grant Udinski comes into play.
Yep, because he's the quarterback guru.
Or Josh McCown. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. The offseason is so fun. So all these things are going to happen within the next 6 weeks or so. Things happen very rapidly. We're getting an offensive coordinator announcement here probably within seven working days.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see possible extension on Ernest Jones. You're going to see a possible extension for Geno Smith.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to start to see players like DK Metcalf potentially. You're going to see right before the league starts, and maybe a week ahead of time, just to give them a jump start, be a player like Tyler Lockett cut. And that's going to hurt.
That won't happen until after the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he'll have his own day where nothing else is going on, and he'll have a press conference, the whole thing. So
the Seahawks will do right by him, and I hope so. There will be press conferences with him going out. He'll have an opportunity to address the media, address the fans.
That did not happen though. The last couple of players shipped out of Seattle.
No, I guess Bobby Wagner. But Bobby Wagner wasn't cut. His contract just ended, and he chose to go elsewhere. So, yeah, we'll see. I still think Lockett deserves that kind of treatment.
I do too. Obviously,
he's been such a good Seahawk for so long. He's the last holdout to the Super Bowl team on the roster.
So the big free agent that I would like to see Seattle spend some of that $62 million we generated today on right guard Trey Smith from Kansas City. I think he would be the big get in free agent. Say 6'6", 330 pounds. Played very, very well with Kansas City, and he's got a OTC valuation for 2024 of $12.6 million. But he only made his cap charge this year was 3.3. So he's up for a big raise. I think that he'd probably be in the neighborhood of $15 to $18 million at right guard, but he would hold down that position then for the next
won't happen
6 or 7 years.
Schneider thinks that guards are overpaid.
I know. I think this is the year though that he breaks out of that box. We'll see.
Yeah,
I think they have to do it. They have to solve this problem before the draft. Now the draft could set up very well for them. We'll get into all that, and there'll be a couple of options. At 18 overall and then at 50 overall, there will be some options for Seattle on the interior of the offensive line in this draft. But
there's there's other
they need
options
to go solve this thing in free agency
that they could go to. Ben Bredesen, the Tampa's left guard, 27, would be a fit. I could see them going with a guy,
Aaron Banks,
the Bears, Trevin Jenkins, maybe a guy like Cody Whitehair and moving him to center, which I think is a better, where that's what he was drafted as, was to be a center. There's some other options.
Dalton Risner from, currently at Minnesota. Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, there's a few guards out there, and a couple of centers. Not a lot, but I'm thinking Oluwatimi. They run Oluwatimi back because they need to solve 2 out of the 3 interior spots, and it just makes the most sense that Oluwatimi kind of held that down okay, and can improve and probably will in the off season. Maybe you bring in somebody to compete with him, but I think that they certainly need a left guard. And they need an upgrade at right guard. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if they go out and spend money on 2 guard prospects in free agency and then draft one, just kind of throw everything at it, see what sticks.
Yeah. I could also see them going and signing a guy like Josh Myers, this Packers starting center, to come in and be what they thought, Connor was going to be this year, and just be that person. So we'll see. Yeah,
I would say Drew Dahlman. If they're going to upgrade at center, I want the Atlanta center. Drew Dahlman, 26 years old, and mauler, a really good athlete, can move in space, can also block, pass block.
He was hurt half the year, though.
Yeah. And maybe that's why he might be available. We'll see. Yeah. Anyway, let's get out of here because we're going to do all this kind of stuff. We're going to go through free agency pretty well. What's next on the horizon? I can't remember right off the top of my head.
I think the next on our horizon was to look at the Seahawks players who are not under contract for 2026 and deciding whether we want to retain them or not.
Okay.
So, yeah, lots of free agency as we start getting into that.
Cool. All right, let's get out of here. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for listening and watching. Follow Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform and our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, share it, like it, leave a comment. Always enjoy those. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.